You've probably seen this is the landing page that we have for the calls. Gives the very basic information that I just talked about in the schedule. So we need your proposals no later than June 7th, so that we can prep it for some peer reviews and consideration. The research areas described, if you click on the learn more, call for research proposals, it pops up a few pages of additional information on what these research areas are. I'll just give you a short characterization of that, give you a wrap up, and then open it up for questions. The session is really just meant to be informal for you all to gain insights. This year, we're focusing on sort of calling it digital acquisition, and you can read this, digital acquisition and acquisition integration and interoperability. What we mean by that is in any large organization, of which the Department of Defense is one of them, we always have to break up the tasks and the duties as assigned. Some of you are probably very familiar with the Department of Defense, others of you, less so. But just think of it as the military services, for example, right? We have an Army, we have a Navy, we have an Air Force, we have a Space Force, we have Marines, we have other organizations in there. They're all chartered with authorities and responsibilities. But at some point, when we're trying to actually do operations and pursuing national security and defense, they all have to interoperate. And how do we actually get that level of interoperability and integration at an enterprise level, if you will, when each of these individual organizations, they have man, train, and equip responsibilities, they have separate funding, they have separate requirements, authorities, and so on. So there's a challenge right now. It's been a challenge since George Washington, probably, right? And how do I get all of these entities to work together? If they're going to go off and acquire capabilities, how do I get those capabilities to work together? Some of this is sort of affectionately referred to as jointness, right? How do we actually interoperate jointly between these services? Some of it's just between two services. So they might go off and acquire a truck or an aircraft jointly together because there's some commonality between the operational capabilities. But a lot of it actually goes all the way to the enterprise level. We need all of them to interoperate, right? We need to be able to have sensor capabilities that cut across all of them. We need to be able to share that information, to do command and control, to be able to, task capabilities, wherever they may be. And that level of interoperability has been a challenge for, like I said, for forever, but certainly for decades and decades. And how do we challenge that? How do we actually get to that point? That's what's driving these research areas. We've done some preliminary research in the area. We've done some thinking. We've had some discussions with sponsors to try to lay out what kinds of areas would make sense for you all to propose in. And these are the 5 that we came up with. So just thinking about governance, for example, how do we actually govern it? How does any organization govern? So you may be from an organizational theory, from economics, from whatever your discipline is. What kinds of lessons might we learn and apply from those areas? How do we set up governance structures? Every organization, like I said, has to divide and conquer, and then reintegrate to provide capabilities to the organization. So are there lessons learned from that could be applied quite broadly to the Department of Defense? I talked about capabilities that are acquired. How do we do that? The Army goes off and acquires trucks, and the Navy goes off and acquires trucks. And it would be easier if they didn't have to cooperate, but at some point they probably do. They may have a radio that needs to talk to each other. How do we get that to interoperate? So just in the pure acquisition sense, what kinds of entities and structures and approaches might make sense? The department does something called requirement setting. So people with stars on their shoulders in uniform are the ones that say, look, I need capability X, right? It doesn't fall to civilians. to do it. But the military needs to say, what do we need in terms of operational capabilities, and those have to be set and formally approved before the acquisition community can turn around and acquire a capability. What approaches might be applicable in that? Again, are there lessons from other disciplines, from theory, from economics or organizational theory and business and so on? How does the commercial sector do it? It's very different, right? They may not have a completely separate structure, but how do we actually sit there and efficiently think about what is it we need? How do we introduce levels of flexibility so that we can, do agile acquisition, for example, and agilely develop hardware and software to be able to deal with it. The other third part of the triad for acquisition and requirements is budgeting. You can't do anything without money. Of course, the purse string, according to the Constitution, is controlled by Congress, so it's even outside of the department's domain. Even though there are lots of budgeting activities that go on, how can we better think about the financial side of it? Providing those finances, again, from an interoperability integration. To a large extent, I don't know what's the characterization. It used to be, well, if 3 military services and each get a 30%, and we give some to the Marines. Well, now we have a Space Force as a fourth service. But what happens there when again the resources are financially stovepiped, but we have to be able to drive interoperable resources? If you want the Army to consider adding capabilities so that it can talk to the Navy on the radio, the Army may say, "Oh, that's not my problem. That's something going beyond what my particular area is. I have enough problems to spend my resources on in the Army. Do we need pure joint enterprise level resources? Do we need something else? Do we need a better way to think about resourcing?" And then finally, sort of stepping back and thinking about it is just the incentive structure. It's hard enough for a single service to think about its own capabilities and service needs, but how can we motivate people to think about jointness, really enterprise level capabilities, when they're structured and they're and incentivized, and they have a culture of thinking about your Army. Yes, they do have what they call joint tours. There are activities and approaches there for trying to get an Army general or officer to go and rotate and have a joint billet, but they're still really from the Army. So are there approaches that you all may have ideas in terms of incentivizing and cutting across boundaries? How does industry do it? Right, we have these problems. We have cost centers in industry, and at some point they need to be motivated to think organizationally, not just to their cost centers and not just to the incentive structure that they're under, right? So those are the 5 areas that we've laid out. You can propose in one of them, you can propose in many. You may have that ideas that cut across multiple ones, and that's great. Just let us know what they are, or maybe designate a primary if you can. But within those areas, that'll give you some idea and some structure for thinking about it. And then ultimately, when you submit it, we're asking you to answer in a sort of very simple structured format. There's something called the Hellmeyer Catechism. This is something that DARPA uses pretty effectively. Just a plain English. What are you doing? What's your idea? How's it different than what we're doing today? What does it cost? What are the risks and uncertainties associated with it? It really gives us, both in terms of peer review and when we're explaining to the government, what your idea is in a very simple terms, and can be answered in a page or two. So again, ultimately, the call is open. There's an online form that you can fill out for submitting. Again, June 7th is the target. In terms of funding, the actual time frame for funding is going to be a bit in flux. We don't have funding in-house. It should arrive sometime in hopefully early summer, but that's what's driving it, and there's some uncertainty there. But think potentially late summer, maybe this is a fall semester activity that you could propose to work through it, and we expect that we should be able to work through it that way. These are subcontracts to you all, unless you're at Stevens, it's direct, but so it's a contract versus a grant. We'll work through subcontracting with your contracting folks in your university, and we're set up and know how to do that. But that's just a quick overview. Happy to open up to any questions that you all have in terms of the topic area or the process on how to submit proposals. So Daryl, you beat them by getting your hand up first, as far as I can tell.
How are you doing, Phil?
Great. How are you?
Oh, good. Are the proposed, or when you mentioned the funding, are you taking the proposals and then going to the potential sponsors to see if they're interested in doing this, in doing a particular project?
So
ones that you would maybe pre-select.
So again, we'll get a peer review of people who are, don't have conflict of interest. They don't have another proposal on it to, rack and stack it. We'll probably do some kind of tiering to help the department sift through it, right, from a technical perspective. But we'll have a pot of money that's slated to come in on one of our subsequent awards that's provided by the Office of Secretary of Defense. It's their sort of contribution to the seedling effort. So for phase one, it'll just be from OSD in terms of what they think is valuable. There's an office, a brand new office that's thinking about acquisition, integration, and interoperability. I think they'll probably have a lot of say into which of the ones they want to select out of it. But the first pot, will be a collection, and we don't have to go off and market it per se. Phase two is different. So the idea is, right, we've had a little bit of time to do some preliminary research. We still think there's something there. Here's a more developed proposal and idea. It can, the sky's the limit at some point, right? How much do you think it's going to take? How long? They'll naturally want early results, 6 months to a year plus, but preliminary results early is better than we'll come back in 2 years and have some wonderful things to tell you. So just, we'll encourage you and can give you guidance on phase two, but those are much better to market depending on, again, who's the potential sponsor. It could be OSD again, it could be one of the military departments. We try to do very applied research. So the goal is, yes, we love to have, right, journal pubs and all of the good things we want in academia, but we want it to be applied. We like to do pilots or experiments where we're actually, right, connecting you with real users that have real data, that understand whatever the organizational problem is, whatever the challenge is. So ultimately the pilot, particularly the phase two pilot, and if you can do it in phase one, love to help you get connected with end users that can help do this sort of very applied. And then in those cases, at least kind of co-funding 50%, for example, if it's Air Force activity, if we can get 50% funding or more from the Air Force, along with something in OSD, unless OSD says, hey, that's a pure Air Force thing, 100% for them. But it's really in phase two that we would do a lot more of that marketing, except for, as I was mentioning, in phase one, if there's a discussions that you would propose. In that case, it's not a funding thing. It's really a sort of a championship and data and access and insight that we can get you connected with.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. Anything else? I don't know. I can't see everyone at the same time, and feel free to raise your hand or just chime in. Jason?
Yes. Hi. Thank you. This is Jason Von Fang from the University of Arizona. And I see a faculty member online here watching this that I'm working with. I'm more on the research admin side. So if they are selected for the phase two in the future, you mentioned this would be a subcontract type of arrangement. And so at that point, would we be able to know which agency is going to fund you so that you can fund us? So I can get sort of the data elements in our financial system correct?
So the way the SERC and AIRC are structured, it's an IDIQ contract. So Stevens is the prime, and then we turn around whichever university or even partnership between universities, which is great, working on that individual effort. So the money normally flows to us off an award, and then we turn around and subcontract to you all. So I don't know if that quite answered your question. It can be from anywhere. We can take pretty much any DoD dollars and work it through the contract that way. And then it would, we'd come through eventually, it would go through, I think Washington Headquarters Service is the primary contract vehicle for us. And then to you, it's just a subcontract, and we include all the contractual clauses and everything. Jason, if that quite answered your question.
I think it does. I just want to make sure that we're identifying the correct prime source funding you when we start the subcontract process, if we're awarded for phase 2.
Yeah, so phase 1 would be OSD dollars through what's called Washington Headquarters Service. They're the contracting shop for OSD. Phase 2 would probably be, it could be co-funded with OSD and one of the services or agencies. It could be all from one of the services and agencies, but they would send the money to OSD, and then OSD would put it on it. So it would look like an OSD thing,
Okay.
Contractually.
That answers it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Other questions?
Hey, Phil, did you see the question in the chat?
Oh, I have to monitor the chat too.
Yes.
How many phase 1 awards will be made? Well, it'll all depend on how much money we get in. We are hoping to get about 500,000 for phase 1s as a pot of money. It could be a little more, it could be a little less. They're still now working to obtain money for us in that area. So, based on that, you can propose up to 75K. If you have a little less, that's fine. Sometimes you don't need, quite that much for whatever period you're looking at. And, if we have smaller ones, we can maybe get an extra award or 2 in. But it's at that level. We're still waiting to find out exactly what the size of that pot is. Let's see. Any others? Period of performance. Oh, what a good question. Let's see. So the SERC is more than you'll want to know. The SERC's base contract is expiring this year. It's a 5-year renewal, so we're up for a renewal on that. But the award can go past that one. It'll be how long that particular award will be. I suspect, and Kara can correct me if I'm wrong, I would suspect it would run through at least December. It might run a little bit. It's probably going to be about 12 months. So it could potentially run through winter and part of spring. But we won't know for sure until our OSD folks finalize exactly how long that period of performance of the award would be. But I would think through, funding sometime this summer, do your research in the fall semester, aim for the end of the calendar year as the period of performance for these activities. Think 3 months for your actual research. The question is, when do we get the funding to you and subcontract to be active? Thanks, Ann. Other questions about jointness, the Department of Defense? I'm happy to chat about anything. While I'm waiting to see if anyone chimes in, feel free to be as innovative as possible. We're really trying to reach out to y'all in academia. What are the kinds of things the department just doesn't consider? This is a very out of the box kind of a thing. I indicated, this has been an intractable problem for forever. But the whole intent of this center that the department is funding is really to try to think out of the box with new ideas, new disciplines. Doesn't have to be engineering, it doesn't have to be business, it could be anything that you say, that's an interesting problem. Here's a new theory. Have you looked at that? Here's a new approach. Here's where my center is going, or whatever area you're looking at. So it can be pretty out of the box. And they are trying to think through, especially in something like jointness, how do we actually tackle this problem? So they're really trying to come up with, fresh ideas out of us. So and that's how my catechism is this novel, or is this something we've been doing already? I think the novel ones, tend to rate better. Karen?
One other thing I wanted to emphasize, and you might have said this earlier, is that we welcome collaborative proposals from, multi-universities, multidisciplinary faculty members as well. So that's all welcome and encouraged, echoing with what Phil said.
Yes, thanks, Carrie. Yeah, that's a great point. So multi-university is fabulous. And we're about 25 universities now in the partnership. One of the reasons why, in addition to reaching out to colleagues and building capabilities, is that it kind of builds in peer review, if you will. So it gives us that ability, to have it resident within the project. So we'll have to do less of that as we're going through it. But we're all trying to stay alive. We realize that, but multi-university and teaming is really encouraged. And if you have those capabilities, I encourage you to go for it. Peter, question? Can't hear you. Look, it shows you off mute, but I still can't hear.
Comms check now.
There you
How's
go.
this?
That's
Okay,
great.
good. Yeah, switching from Microsoft Teams to this is problematic. So I'm with the Army Research Lab, and I would appreciate if you can elaborate on kind of the government aspect to this. I know you mentioned money's coming out of OSD, but to what extent can Army or other service stakeholders shape this process, whether it be review or other things?
So I'm sorry, where are you from again? Peter, what did you say that you were at the Army Research Lab?
That's correct, yeah.
So if there's a university that you have connections with, and they want to, you want to work with them to help sort of do a proposal, that's great. So we've had cases, for example, in the last incubator, Ohio State worked with AFICC, it's a contracting shop over at Wright Pat, relative to incentives and culture, right? How do you actually map incentives and culture? How do you change it, right? We're trying to do innovation, and our culture is not set up for it in the department. So how do we actually do that? So they had connections in phase one already with AFICC to think about it. They were all in. They're very interested in trying to, how do we help our poor contracting officers? You want to be incentivized to do it. Well, we disincentivize the kinds of the behaviors that we're trying to deal with. So yeah, so if you all have universities that are in our partnership and can advise them, give them insights, that's all fabulous and to the good. If you have ideas but you don't know what universities might be there, we can try to help you connect with areas. It could be that we have proposals. If you want to talk with OSD at that point and say, well, hey, we think this is a great challenge. We can connect you with our sponsors in OSD, and they may invite you in to say, well, what do you think? What areas would be helpful for the Army, right? We're dealing with interoperability. You all do it. You don't do it at OSD. We don't make anything in OSD. We don't acquire. We set policy. So ultimately, right, making connections with the services is really where we need to be, and so yeah, any connection we can help or that you have would be fabulous.
Great, yeah, I'll follow up on LinkedIn.
Great, thanks, Peter. Hey, Talon?
Hi, Philip. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me all right?
Barely.
How about now?
It's a little better.
Okay, so I was wondering if there are any restrictions on who and what we can fund with the resources. So, for example, with some of the DoD funding, there's a restriction of having students that are US citizens or not. Like, are there restrictions that we should be aware of?
You're breaking up a little bit. Are you asking about like citizenship and data access and those kinds of things?
Let me try again. Can you hear me better now?
That's much better.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. So I was wondering if there are any restrictions on who and what we can fund with the resources. So with some DoD funding, there are restrictions such as, hey, the students need to be a US citizen. I know this is not a lot of money, but maybe let's say I want to fund like half of a semester of a student. Does a student have to be a US citizen, for example?
So it'll depend on the topic and the kind of information you may want to get access to. If it's purely what we call fundamental research, you're not getting any sensitive data. I mean, it doesn't make too much, sense. If it was, I don't know, North Korea, they might be a little upset, but it's usually driven by the kind of information that may or may not be involved. If it's purely, if you say, hey, look, Phil, this is all pure theory, it's all fun, basic, I'm not anticipating needing any, sensitive information, then we're all good, whether it's contractually fundamental research, we can sort of act like it is. If you need to start getting access to CUI controlled and classified information or classified or any of those things, then those activities, restrictions would come into play. Export control, that's a US citizenship thing. If it's CUI, we'd have to find out from the data source, what kind of restrictions is it. May or may not be US citizens and may or may not be US persons, which is more like green card holder and some other categories for dealing with it. The other angle is the way the UARC is set up. We can take money from the DoD, but it can only go to our university partners. So if you have a faculty member that's at a startup company, for example, they say, hey, could you fund my startup? Sorry, we cannot send or receive money to industry. It all needs to stay within academia. If you have a partner university that's not in our consortium, that can be a challenge. We have to get special, permission to do it, other than the 20 or so that are sort of pre-approved. We would probably want to talk to us and see, how much of a stretch that is. But yeah, I think, it's really for academia. We can talk to people. We can talk to people in industry. We can talk to startups and those kinds of things. They potentially could get funded parallel to it, but it can't go through the UARC, funding mechanisms, if that helps at all.
Thanks. Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor.
Bill, there's another question in the chat.
Can we get a list of attendees at this meeting looking for collaborators? Great, Dave. I think so. Kara, are we tracking? I think we had to register. I think we could probably share.
Can you repeat that?
Can we get they were wondering, can we get a list of attendees to share so that people can look for collaborators, potential collaborators?
Sure. I think that's doable if no one objects with sharing whoever registered with one another.
Let us know if you object, otherwise.
There you go.
That's that. And Bell asked, is there an F&A cap or a normal DoD F&A? Carol could probably answer this better than I. So your university will have your normal university overheads. I believe the ones that are in the partnership are all okay. But Kara, do you know?
Yeah, and I believe it's, your negotiated O&R rates.
Yeah, I don't know. Anne, did that help? Let's see. Jason asked, okay, I don't know. Yeah, so period of performance, nominally through the end of calendar 23, there may be some stretches into early 24, depending on funding timing and those kinds of things. But yeah, should the research think 3 months, think a semester. And hopefully this fall semester and everything would line in. You can budget for labor, you can budget for tuition, you can budget travel. The only things you ought to know is that it's hard to switch after you budget between labor and travel and equipment. So figure it out or forever hold your peace between those categories, because if you do it, we have to go back all the way back to OSD contracting, and it's slow and hard to get. So we probably don't have the time, especially on some things like this. The other thing is, with the way the SERC contract set up, we have to get prior approval on any travel, not just the budget part. You have the budget, you say, okay, Phil, I want to go to a conference. Well, there's a form you'll have to submit to us to transmit to OSD to get it approved. It's usually pretty quick, takes a week or so. But if you come afterward and go, oh dear, I forgot, can I submit it? And they won't allow reimbursement. So they're pretty hard over on that one. That's just something that we'll try to keep in mind, because it does happen. Can we include our federally negotiated indirect rate? I think so. I think that goes to, and Kara can correct me, the standard rates that the university charges generally, I think, are accepted by the OSD, and I don't know if there are any cases where those areas. But yeah, I think all your indirect rates, your fringe, your F&A, and all of those areas, I think are easy to do. Yeah. Kara, anything to add there? I think that's right.
Nope, that was correct.
And asked something about a waiver, and I'm not tracking.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so our IDC is even higher than U of A's. It's 58.9. And on small budgets like this of 75K max, as you said earlier, sometimes the department will provide, OSP will approve a waiver where we cost share. We don't take the IDC completely. So we bring it down to like 10%. And I didn't know if there was a cap on this or not, but I guess not.
Not that I know of, but it's escaping my expertise in terms of the other university overhead rates. I know how the Stevens things work on the SERC, but anything.
Yeah, because this would take like 35 plus grand out of the budget just for IDC. Yeah.
Welcome to institutions. I don't know. Yeah, Kara, anything that they ought to know about?
No, and it's like you said, I would discuss with your OSP at your respective institution. And upon selection, if you're selected, we can work with our OSP to answer and work through any of those details. That's the best that we could say right now.
Okay. Any other questions? Anything I missed, Doug, in the chat? I think I got them all.
No, I think you got them all.
Okay. Great. Any other questions or concerns? Or these are pretty fun, right? This should be an opportunity to really think out of the box, to propose something. Again, we don't know or constrain really what phase 2 might be. It's, the more you ask, the harder it is for the OSD folks to get funding. The longer it is, especially the longer to initial results. But again, the idea is to be applied, to do piloting, to do experimentation, understand the real challenges that the department's under, try to move it forward. That's the intent. Lots of people in my prior lives, I've been written lots of reports that, you sit on shelves and it doesn't go anywhere. So we're really trying to work through and do transition of ideas and capabilities. Sometimes it's different policies, some, maybe a tool, it can be anything. Let's see, here are the published reports on previous incubators. Yes, thank you, Ellen. So it can run the gamut. I don't know if you have any questions about intellectual property. I think it's, standard fare. You have prior funding and you want to reserve, we'll work through that. To make certain we protect your IP, but you always have commercial rights. It's the standard things with the department. Dave Dropkin and Chris Yukins are looking for collaborators. So if you take a look at the chat, and please get in touch with Dave and Chris. And if you need coordinates, we can provide their email addresses. Can teams submit more than one proposal? I think so. We won't fund more than one, I suspect. We try to balance it out and try to get a breadth of it, but I don't think we've ever had a limitation on more than one. If you do 10, I might complain because that's a lot of work. But yeah, I would, if you got one or two ideas and you don't know which one you want to submit them both, that's fine. And then apologies because you'll have to write 2 papers, but again, it should be short. Thanks, Roshi. And there's Dave Drapkins and Chris's emails addresses. We may also try to do institutional balance, if you will. So, if we have all wonderful proposals from Stevens, they're not all going to get funded. We're going to try to balance it out. We're trying to really leverage the breadth of the academic partnership. But we've had a couple, I think, in the past that rank really highly, and those were considered. Other questions, comments? Again, we certainly appreciate your interest. This really is it's kind of cool. I spent most of my life dealing with the Department of Defense and trying to, tilt at windmills and make a difference. And so this is really an interesting opportunity to take your research and then go off and apply it. If you can get connected with someone like the Army Research Lab or really anyone, again, let us know if you need contacts to do it. They have some pretty interesting challenges, and it's oftentimes more than what you might imagine if you're sitting in your office staring at the wall and imagining what the DoD is up against. They're pretty challenging. And it's still, even dealing with those, it oftentimes really is still research. But you go and talk to the lawyers and they'll say, well, it sounds great, Phil, but let me tell you why that won't work. And you'll say, oh, wow, that's fascinating. I never thought of that. So it's pretty intellectually stimulating as you go through some of these challenges. And like I said, people have been beating their heads against the wall forever trying to deal with these issues. So we're really excited about it and looking forward to your proposals. Again, I think you have our contacts on the information page if you have any other questions. Peter says. Great, so Peter has his coordinates in the chat. Yes, oh, and international, we didn't talk about international, but that's the whole allied international interoperability is yet another twist. If we can just get the Army and Navy to talk to each other, wouldn't that be wonderful? But, you know, how do we deal with allied partners? How do we deal with NATO? How do we deal with all of those kinds of things? And interoperabilities, you know, there are standards and then there's standards. You know, there's MOSA, open systems architecture, and are they really open, and so on and so on. So, you know, lots of things there. OSD lawyers are conservative, but they protect us too, Dave. I don't know. Yes. But it really is interesting, you know, dealing with the lawyer,
Phil,
the finance people.
they overprotect you until you point out that it's their opinion, not the law.
And how many people have been as one? And how many decades? 3 decades. Oh dear, that's a pretty low probability. I'll take it.
Yeah.
But yeah, they'll, you know, you may not agree with their interpretation, but yes, if it's interpretations, then well, all right, thanks for notifying me, but I'll go for it. But we love our lawyers, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. I was one, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. If you have a great idea, we may need to shop for the right lawyer so you get the right opinion. And Phil knows all of them quite well.
Yeah. I knew of cases where a decision maker said, "Thank you for informing me. I got it, but we're going to go with this other approach." But beware. Yeah, I know, but you know, at some point, the department is about risk. It's all about risk management, risk taking. We can't afford to be zero risk. You know, there's lives at stake and, you know, security and everything. So it's an interesting challenge. Right. Anything else?
I do have a question.
Yes.
So if two schools were to collaborate jointly on the same topic, but you know, the topic whereby the topic is such that, you know, the expertise from each of the two, you know, collaborating schools is needed to address that particular question. Will those schools be splitting the amount, or will they independently have their own allocations?
So they would split the 75 somehow, whatever the reasonable split is. But yeah,
I see.
The phase 2 would be again open-ended. But yeah, we've had cases with at least 2, and I'm trying to think if I've had 3 to do the phase 1 pilot. I think I have actually. I'd have to go see if there's 4, but I know there are 2, and I think I could think of one that's at like 3 or 4. But again, think of it as it's preliminary research, right?
Okay.
Can I get a little money to think about this crazy idea before I go embarrass myself with a real proposal? So it's in that vein of, you know, we're getting a little bit of money, which is actually pretty cool. But yeah, it would be split between them. But again, in phase 2, you know, it is what it is. But yeah, and I think people have been pretty happy with, you know, you get a good collaborator. Hopefully it's a good collaborator.
Right. Right.
It's pretty rewarding, and it, you know, it builds capacity and so on. It also, by the way, you know, sort of opens a door if you haven't been, you know, if folks haven't been dealing with SERC or AIRC, now, you know, you're kind of part of the team. So there may be other opportunities that come up.
Right.
So
one follow-on question to that is there, and I'm sorry I joined the meeting late. One follow-on question to that is there like a count on the number of this awards that will be given?
So we don't have a firm number on exactly how much. We're going to get a pot of money. It's going to be about 500K, something like that. So the number of awards will depend on the size of the proposals we get and the final amount. You know, it can go up a little, it could go down a little, but it's probably going to be somewhere in that ballpark. And then, you know, you might say I only need 50K because I'm going to do a quick look, and that's fine. So we've had some that it's 75K down to the penny, and we've had other proposals that say, you know, I just need 40 or 50. So depending on how many that, you know, we get that are smaller, that rank and get picked, you know,
Okay,
you might squeeze in one or two more rather than just doing the straight math.
okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Sure. Any other questions? And hopefully this is helpful. I don't know, Kara, you're recording. I don't know, are we posting the recording so others can?
Yep, that's the plan, and we'll put together some high level frequently asked questions and post that on the website.
How many times did Phil embarrass himself and say something that was wrong? But no, this, again, we're very excited about, you know, hearing from you and getting new ideas. You know, I can come up with ones, but I know you all will have many more than I would. And we are trying to really think through this. And so hopefully, if you have any questions, you know, again, you know, connect back to us. I'll stay on for a few minutes if you want to hang on. I think looks like we're answered out. Thank you.